Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Kristen Dorr. I'm the Integro webinar moderator. If you're new to Integro or our webinar series, hello and welcome. We do monthly webinars that we keep to 30 minutes so that it's a quick and valuable use of your time. Since this is December, it's our last webinar of 2017. And on the line with me, I have Jeff Dunning. He's the VP of Support and Strategic Initiatives here at Integro. He's going to be talking about sensitive data remediation. And we also have Scott Burt, who is Integro's CEO. He'll be doing a brief introduction of Jeff and sensitive data remediation prior to Jeff's presentation. But before these guys start and take it away, I do have a few quick housekeeping notes. First, we recommend that you maximize your screen, gives you the best view. And second, if you have questions at any time during this presentation, please ask them in the question box in the sidebar, and Jeff will answer all of those at the end. So with that, I will let Scott take it from here.
Excellent, Kristen. Thank you very much, and thanks everybody for joining us. We got a great audience today, and I just scanned through the list. I see a lot of familiar faces of our customers. Thank you for joining us, and some folks that we don't know, and also some of our partners as well. So thanks for coming here to join us. And this is a hot topic, and there's so much regulatory requirement and need to be cleaning up your file systems or wherever your data is, as Jeff will explain here in a minute. And it's a very timely need, very important need. And the good news is we've figured out how to do it, right? And there's a lot of considerations to take into consideration. So I look forward to your comments and feedback after this. Please call me or Jeff afterwards and let us know your thoughts on the presentation or the content and any questions or challenges you might have. Jeff Dunning has been both a customer himself of Integro's many years ago, and he's been a vice president and a leader here at Integro for a long time as well. So he has a lot of experience on the front lines, as he's not a the old air quote sales rep or some guy with marketecture. He's front lines technical leadership, leading teams of people at financial institutions and the like, doing solutions like this. So I think you'll enjoy Jeff's presentation. Jeffrey, take it away.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks everybody for attending. So we're gonna cover sensitive data remediation. We'll kind of get into it pretty quick here, but we'll start real quick with the about Integro. So just information governance, content security, content management, helping enterprises govern, secure, and leverage. And we'll talk a little bit more about Integro towards the end if we have some time left. But just a little bit about us. Getting into it, sensitive data remediation. So what I want to do here is I want to kind of just give a quick overview of the problem. I think we all understand the problem, and really get into our options around remediation, right? So lots of stuff out there about identification and finding the sensitive data within our organizations. This is more about how do we handle that data after we find it. There's a lot of different avenues for going around doing the identification piece, but where we stumble the most is what do we do with it after we find it? What are our options, and how do we actually deploy those options for sensitive data? So let's just start a little bit with the problem, just to kind of give a little overview here, and I won't spend a lot of time in it because I think by now we all understand it. But what is sensitive data, right? PII, so personal identifiable information, social security number, driver's license, the typical stuff. The payment card industry, credit card numbers, all the things that are associated with processing credit cards and account numbers and that type of stuff. And then we also have the highly confidential information. So sensitive data is also in that realm of information that is confident to the company, right? Communications, maybe product information, HR type information, strategy and resource. So it's not just our stuff that we typically think about in social security numbers and payment card and credit card numbers. It also goes into confidential information that's important to organizations. So that's kind of what we're talking about here as far as sensitive data goes. So what's the problem? It's simple. We're all experiencing rapidly growing volumes of data. I mean, this stuff is, the data is just growing at a pace that's just crazy constantly, and there's ever-growing requirements for regulatory requirements. There's sensitivity. There's various hacks and all these different things that we have to be concerned about with that data. A lot of the times, from getting compromised, it's not kind of, if I'm going to get compromised, it's when, and how do I reduce that risk so when that when comes, I'm not overly exposed to it, right? So that's our problem. We have a lot of data, tons of regulations, and and the whole concept around security and sensitivity of that data, right? We know it's important, so why clean it up? Again, we talked about it. Regulatory drivers, data breaches, reputation risk, GDPR is coming, and that plays into this whole mix. So I think we all understand the problem. The regulations keep coming. Everybody in those industries, especially finance and healthcare, we understand those regulations. They keep getting further and further. So I need to protect myself. I need to eliminate my risk. And how do I go about eliminating my risk? And that's what we're going to talk about here, is how can we start going about eliminating and remediating that risk we see. So clearly the problem's out there. So what are my options now? Identification is probably the simpler side of this. We're not going to cover all this, but I've found my problems. I understand where my data is. What can I do with it now? That's really the question on the table. So, in what we're doing, there's 4 options for remediation. Delete it. That's the best for security, the best for, removing the risk. Honestly, that's the easiest, the best way. I shouldn't say the easiest, but the best way. Secure it. We'll talk a lot about more of that. Move it, encrypt it, just put it behind, multiple firewalls, that type of stuff. Mask and redact, alter the data in place, right? Let's not worry about changing access and all that stuff, but let's alter it in place, and we're going to spend a lot of time on that. We're finding that is the hot button today. That's what's getting us the most traction. That's what's made us the most successful in helping our clients remove their risk, is the ability to do masking and redacting in place. And then tokenization, the ability to tokenize that sensitive data so that you can get back to the original. And we'll go through that a little bit. So we'll start with our first one, delete. Again, fantastic option. That's, if we could delete our content, delete all of it, all that risky content, we wouldn't need to be here today, right? So that's the bottom line. I mean, if I could hit the delete key on every piece of sensitive data I have out there and just use delete as my option, there's no need for this webinar. There's no need to go any further. But really, it's not realistic, right? We have concepts around what if the data is a record, defining the business value, legal holds, and there's just so many other things that drive the inability to just push the delete key, right? We have needs for it. We have needs for artifacts around sensitive data, maybe not the data in it, and we'll see examples of this. Right, I may need to keep an image of a driver's license. I don't necessarily need to know your driver's license number, but I need to keep the artifact to prove that I got it, right? So there's reasons why I got to keep it, and that's what holds me from deleting it. So while deletion is the fantastic option, always look at it first, say, if I can delete this, that's my best way to go and eliminate my risk, but it's not always viable. Option number 2 is secure it. So Securing it is useful when the content can be moved with the business processes that generated, and that's the most important thing. The data and everything and all the processes that generate that data have to move with that content, right? We have to also move the users who need access to that, right? We limit those users. Basically, securing it means in some financial organizations that process credit cards, they build card data environments where they have card numbers, credit card numbers, visible out in the open, but highly secured, right? Multiple extra levels of firewall. We limit who can get in there. We limit the security is different. Might be, multi-form factor type security and stuff. And we build these separate networks to hold this data because we have a business need to do it. So securing it is great if we can move everything associated with it. However, there's problems with that, right? I'm going to say the biggest one is always the cost, right? Every piece of data we move in there, every business process we move inside these secured networks brings with it a cost. It's a cost of managing that network and having it grow. It's a cost of bringing users that have to now access that data and see that data into these networks, which changes a lot of what we're doing. And then we have the whole process, the whole problem of the business processes, right? Are we going to disrupt those processes? Do we have to define new business processes? Do we have to change applications to support this? So it's not always simple to get that data into that secured network. For some data, that's the only way to go. It needs to be there. We have to see it. It's got to be in its original fashion. So we have to be able to move it to that secured network. So securing it is an option. There's a cost associated with it. There's some business disruption associated with it, but truly an option. The next option is redact or mask it. And this is where we're really seeing a lot of momentum forward. A lot of organizations seeing this as really a big tool in their toolbox to come up and reduce their risk. So basically, redacting it's a way to keep relevant business data where it is while neutralizing the sensitive data, right? So what does that say? So I'm going to redact, maybe leave the last 4. We've seen this for years in our structured content in databases where, you know, we store people's credit cards and only display the last 4 at that time. We just kind of get rid of the rest of the credit card numbers. So we have some information and we've masked it, so we're not showing that off. So we've seen it a long time. It's less disruptive than securing it. We don't have to move business processes associated with it and those types of things. And it's most useful when the sensitive data does not add value to the content. I talked about the artifacts a little bit earlier. You know, when we think about various business processes where sensitive data is kind of used, we get a document that might have some information on it, maybe has a credit card number, has your social security number. Well, that social security number is then, you know, typed into a system of record. It's probably a secure system in that network we just talked about. I need the document with all the other information, but I no longer need your social security number because I have access to it in this system. Well, that gives me the ability to redact that social security number in that document. Now I can keep the artifact, all that information where it was. I don't have to change my process, but I've reduced my risk. I've gotten rid of the sensitive data associated to that. So that's the, you know, stuff being used in the structured world for years, now bringing it to the unstructured world, which is not simple in that, right? So there's a lot of ways we can do it, right? So you'll see here, this is, you know, we talk about taking patient information and masking it in the database, right? So when you have tables and stuff, and you can see the examples of the side, right? So the original copies of the content, we not necessarily need it. We'll talk a little bit about tokenization where that might be the case, but this is truly around where we can change our content to some other value, right? Like I said, we could redact, we can mask, we can change the name to a completely different name, whatever that case might be, but it kind of gives us the tool. So let's look at it a little bit in action, right? And see what we can do. So with the tool, we're able to mask over 48 file types. And this is really the cool part, right? So we're getting into the ability to do masking and redaction against PDFs. Think about in the banking industry, bank statements. The ability to mask all the codes and account numbers in a bank statement and leaving those statements where they are and not having to kind of move them to secured network. Our general office docs, Word docs, Excel spreadsheets, how many credit card numbers exist in Excel spreadsheets that we'll be able to clean up and keep the other value associated with it. And then really cool around scanned images, us being able to redact information in a picture of your driver's license or any kind of scanned image that we might be able to go there. And the list goes on, text files and all these things. How many systems we have out there where we're actually, the system might be processing credit cards and we're dumping credit card numbers into log files. Well, the ability to go to that log file and just mask out that credit card number over time on a schedule even to get that done. So different types. And you know, there's different ways to go about it, and we'll talk a little bit about the engine, but basically regex and direct find and replace. So if you just say, hey, I want to change anywhere I find this person's name to this person's name, right? And we could be, you know, just putting in a fictitious name there, and every time we find the name, we put in a fictitious name. Regex, that's really used for social security numbers, credit card numbers. Go find these patterns, this pattern of an account number, date of birth, whatever the case might be, and replace it with this, just a simple number, and get rid of it. And then the region area is really where we get into our items like XML files and images and those types of things, the ability to replace content in an area or a region. Anytime you find this tag, we're just going to go and get rid of the data in there and put the word redacted in our example here. So we have multiple options for driving this mask and redaction type of information. You'll see here where we can do it on images. We talked a bunch about driver's license, but you can see how I have the ability to kind of go out there and just change the driver's license, right? I can keep the artifact, the fact that I got the driver's license, and I can just make changes to it, right? I could change the driver's license number, change the name, have whatever rule I want to put in place for how I want to do it. In this case, we even took the picture out and replaced it with just, you know, the silhouette type picture. So we can manipulate images however we want. Same thing around images, around checks. You'll see there where we went and changed a whole bunch of information on a check based off the image and the location, and then we know where that's at. So when we do, we go and say, okay, find that word there, here's where it's located, and this is what I want to put there. So we can modify images so that we can, again, maintain the original, maintain the artifacts, but get rid of the data that causes us the grief or the risk associated with it. So super powerful here for images and as well as our Word docs and those kind of things, right? So, and then the last example around PDFs, and this is really an area where there's been a lot of PDFs are probably one of the bigger problems organizations are generating. So whether they're bank statements, invoices, and all this type of content that we generate that has account numbers and people's names and credit card numbers and all those different things. And the key here is when you're dealing with PDFs, not everything is in a free form text format. So if you ever took an opportunity to go look at maybe a bank statement or something and just copied some text out of the bank statement and pasted it into Notepad, you'll see that in some areas it is free form text. In this case here, with the document we're looking at on the left side, that account number there, free form text. If I copied and pasted that into a Notepad, I would see the number just as it exists, right? There's other things that Adobe stores in some correct folder account number here on the document. If I copied that and pasted it out to my Notepad, I just get some garbage, right? Some machine characters there, and it would make no sense to me. But I need to be able to redact it. I need to be able to find it within the document. So we were able to go after content in PDF files in these various formats, as well as some bitmap images in Micker codes. When you have a lot of statements and stuff, that kind of content is stored in those bitmap images. So with PDFs, there's been a lot of work done around being able to get into a PDF and looking at content in the various stages or the various levels that content exists. So this here, being able to mask and redact content in place and leaving it there so I don't disrupt my business processes. I don't have to worry about changing security. People have access to it prior, they still have access to it, but I eliminated my risk, has become a big tool in our toolbox to be able to do remediation for organizations around their sensitive data. And the other one is tokenization. And tokenization we've been doing in the structured world forever, but tokenization is around, you know, substituting a data element with a non-sensitive equivalent, right? This is really important for when I want to constantly display that without the sensitive information. So I want to be able to not deliver that credit card number, but I need to maintain the original. So I need to maintain the integrity of the original someplace so that if someone came or someone had the right access, they can get to that original data. But for everybody else, we always see this tokenized number. So I can change a credit card number. You'll see there an example in the middle of the screen. Change that credit card number to some tokenized number, and then I move forward, and everybody sees that tokenized number. But if someone said, hey, we need to go back and get that true credit card number, the original does exist. It's secured someplace, exists. You could always go back to it. So you can eliminate large volumes of sensitive data without worrying about changing the integrity or making business decisions around, do we really need this today? Are we ever going to need this number again? Well, if those questions come up, tokenization is a great form for going ahead and changing that content, but maintaining the original so you have access to go back to that original. So that's another option there around that is tokenization. And again, same tool kind of doing this type of stuff. We also have the ability to do intelligent redaction. So this is a little bit more, not so much remediation, but business process type stuff. We call it mask at the glass. It's not so much masking your application, but think about applications that use content. So use attachments, maybe a PDF. So maybe I'm using an application and it's got a link to my bank statement. Well, when I hit that click to that bank statement, based on my role, I either see the original with all the information in it, or I'm going to get that document back with the information redacted or masked or whatever the role tells me I do. So it's multi-level role-based redaction at the glass for attachments to the business process. So we're not necessarily talking about masking at the application level, but the content associated with those applications, right? Keep our originals. We don't have to make all these redacted copies for different people to use. We can kind of do it as we drive it up into the glass, as we request access to that content. So to see that in action, here's a little bit kind of what we understand. But manager with elevated privileges would bring this document up. They'd get this unredacted document, this guest folio with all the information in it, right? That's the document that's saved in the storage. If I'm the customer service rep, I'm using the same application and I go to pull up that folio, you'll see that I get a redacted version. So based on my role, when I get that same folio back, there's some information missing that I don't get to see. So I'm making that decision based on that user's role in the organization, and that you can have multiple different roles and display different information based on those roles. So doing redaction on the fly, not having to keep multiple levels of documents out there, secure document. Maybe that customer service rep is not inside the secured network, they're sitting outside. So when that document is delivered, it knows that you are not in the secured network, and I'm going to redact the contents when I show it to you. So there's not only based on the role, but where you might be sitting on the network, so to speak. So I'm not in the secured network, this is what I get to see at that point in time. So that's intelligent redaction on the fly. And then the last kind of use case for this, a little bit outside of remediation, but just as important in the whole overall risk stuff, is test data environments. So, you know, we're moving production data into our test environments to do our testing, and our test environments are clearly less secure than what we're doing in our production area, right? We have the ability to do redaction to keep that test data free of the sensitive data. So we can make a copy of our production data, run it through the tool, redact out all the sensitive data, allows us to have these realistic test environments with the volumes of data we need to actually do our testing, but we limit it down to have zero risk. So we get out all the sensitive data. We're not putting it in our test environment. We have these environments that are a little less secure, more people have access to it. So we build realistic test environments, but have the ability to reduce our risk in the amount of sensitive data that's out there. So basically, we make a big copy, we run our redaction against it. Next thing you know, you have all these documents out there to be doing testing on, but there's no sensitive data within those documents. So that's another way to use the tool for reducing that, for remediating risk in that production data outside of that area. So that's kind of I kind of went through that really quick. I don't know if there was any questions or not, but that's the remediation. That's what we're seeing as an organization, how we're getting companies now through beyond identification and finding and understanding where their sensitive data is to actually start remediating and removing the risk. These are the tools, the 4 options that we're seeing, with Redact and Mask really being the newer tool set to our toolbox, and right now getting the most traction in that arena. So Kristen,
awesome,
are there?
Yeah, let's start with some questions, guys. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the question box. We do have a few that have come in. First question for you, Jeff. Can this tool be used to find any masked data outside of the typical sensitive data types like credit card or social security number if we wanted to mask product names?
Yeah, absolutely. So we mentioned it a little bit earlier in the conversation, but so the tool uses, it's got a rules engine is basically what we call it, and the rules engine allows us to put various forms of regular expressions in there to find content. So we could go after just words. We could look for particular words, maybe their product names, or some, we talked earlier that sensitive data also includes your highly classified type information. So the rules engine gives us the flexibility to go after formats of data, like a social security number. We could put in words, we can put in a combination of words to kind of look for. So there's a lot of different things that we can do with the rules engine to say, I want to mask or redact content that follows this particular format, not only locations within images, but also just look for particular words. So you have the ability to kind of do this around all kinds of data based on what your needs are or what the content we find is. So in that identification phase of sensitive data cleanup, we're finding documents, and then we say, okay, we got this batch of documents. Here's 30,000 documents, or here's a log file that's generated every night. Here's where the content exists. I need to go out there and find it and redact it. And you just kind of control that rules engine to be able to do that for you. So the flexibility there is to go after a lot of different data elements.
Great. We do have a lot of questions coming in. Thank you guys for submitting your questions. Feel free to continue to ask questions, and Jeff will keep answering them. We do have one question saying the sound kept cutting out and whether or not the webinar will be available later to review. And yes, it will. We're happy to share Jeff's slide deck, but the recording will also be published here shortly after the webinar that will be sent out to you guys. Question for you, Jeff. What is the throughput of the tool? For example, how many records can be redacted in an hour?
So it's really hard to put a number on that. It all depends on, there's so many variables, right? The document type we're going after, we definitely, we can do text files a lot faster, but we're seeing, on average, we're getting multiple documents a second once we have finished our identification phase. So we're going after large volumes in short amount of time. So we're seeing the ability to do, multiple documents per second. So 2-3 documents a second. So we're talking about a few hundred, in an hour's period of time. And then the tool can be kind of used in, it scales horizontally. So we kind of go after stuff. So some of the stuff is a lot quicker. If I'm going after text file, the volume is huge. If I'm going, images take a little bit longer because I'm finding those pixel areas and that type of stuff. But the tool also scales horizontally. So we can take that same rules engine and put it into multiple, virtual machines and go after just huge chunks of data simultaneously. So we have the ability to scale pretty high. But all those numbers, it's hard to kind of put a number on it till you really know what kind of content. Is it a multi-page PDF? Is it an image? Is it a Word doc created in 2007 versus 2016? They all provide different challenges.
Great. We are at the 30-minute mark. We have one more question for you, Jeff, and then we can wrap things up. Thank you, everyone, for attending. As you close out, there is a quick one-question survey. If you could answer that, give us some feedback on how we did today, that would be fantastic. So last question for you, Jeff. Can the tool migrate files to a quarantine location based on rules?
So the tool is not have the move, it's not an actionable move type tool. So a lot of your identification tools will do the action side of it. So if it's a matter of saying, I found a document, it's got a social security number and I need to move it to that secured location, most of the identification tools will take care of that problem. So the tools we're doing for the identification part of CleanUp are providing those actions in most cases for us.
Yeah, this is Scott. I'll just add, we've had a lot of success with IBM's product SportIQ for this, and the two together can really achieve a lot of goals in addressing huge volumes, hundreds of terabytes of files across a variety of systems, and it's really a good one-two punch. Jeff, thank you. This was excellent. And you know, Kristen mentioned a moment ago that this webinar will be recorded and up online. We actually have a lot of webinars, and they're all just available. They're all a half an hour in length, and I think they're pretty good and educational. So I'd encourage you to review the whole inventory of webinar education that we have on our website. And we really appreciate your joining us. Thank you very much. Thanks.